Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmasvarupini Avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see many of you again, and good to see some new faces also. Thank you for coming out on this rainy, Thursday. So I hope we have a nice time. When I gave the topic, the person who was responsible for recording it is what is it? The both and avatar? So the topic is Sri Ramakrishna, the both and Avatara. So it's meant to be intriguing. So I'll explain it in a second. But I hope you noticed that in the opening mantra, Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma surupine Avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Avatara varishta. Swami Vivekananda composed that mantra, and he described Sri Ramakrishna as Avatara varishta, the supreme Avatara, the greatest of all incarnations. In what sense was Sri Ramakrishna the greatest of all avatars? Swami Vivekananda, in an 1894 letter to his brother disciple Swami Ramakrishnananda, he explained, he said, "My dear brother, that Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was God incarnate, I have not the least doubt. His life is a searchlight of infinite power thrown upon the whole mass of Indian religious thought. He was the living commentary to the Vedas and to their aim. He had lived in one life the whole cycle of the national religious existence in India. Whether Bhagavan Sri Krishna was born at all, we are not sure, and avatars like Buddha and Chaitanya are monotonous. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa is the latest and the most perfect, the concentrated embodiment of knowledge, love, renunciation, catholicity, and the desire to serve humanity. So where is anyone to compare with him? He must have been born in vain who cannot appreciate him." It's a remarkable passage where Swami Vivekananda, explains what makes Sri Ramakrishna such a unique and great avatara, incarnation. And as far as I can tell, what he emphasizes is that Sri Ramakrishna was the Samanvaya avatara. He harmonized apparently conflicting spiritual traditions, apparently conflicting religions, apparently conflicting spiritual paths. And he didn't do so intellectually. He did it experientially. He was like a great spiritual scientist. An ordinary scientist will take chemicals and mix them together and then see what comes. He was a spiritual scientist. He experimented with the different religious traditions of the world, the different spiritual paths of the world, practiced all of them, and then realized that they lead to the same goal, the realization of the same divine reality in different forms and different aspects. He proved it to himself. He experientially verified in his own life the truth of all the different religious paths. Interestingly, Sri Aurobindo, who was a great devotee of Sri Ramakrishna also, in 1908, so just a few years after Swamiji left his body, he, like Swamiji, he described Sri Ramakrishna as the last and greatest of all the avatars. And then Sri Aurobindo explains why. He says, "For while other avatars felt God in a single or limited aspect, Sri Ramakrishna felt God in his illimitable unity as the sum of an illimitable variety." This is classic Aurobindonian English prose, so I'll repeat it again. He uses sophisticated English. So he says, why was Sri Ramakrishna the greatest of all avatars? Because while other avatars felt God in a single or limited aspect, Sri Ramakrishna felt him in his illimitable unity as the sum of an illimitable variety. This word illimitable, it's a beautiful word, which Sri Aurobindo uses frequently. It means you can never place a limit to the divine. You can never say God is only this and nothing more. That's what illimitable means. You cannot place a limit to God. And Sri Ramakrishna realized that illimitable infinitude of God through many different paths. So what Swami Vivekananda and what Sri Aurobindo are emphasizing is that what made Sri Ramakrishna so great and so unique, even in the history of incarnations, is that he harmonized everything. And that's what I want to focus on today. And most of you are probably familiar with the life of Sri Ramakrishna, but I'll just mention very briefly. What are some of these spiritual paths that Sri Ramakrishna practiced and followed? He was a great bhakta of Mother Kali. So he worshipped Mother Kali, realized Mother Kali, but in many different forms. What's interesting is, we all know the famous incident. He's intensely practicing spiritual disciplines, full of longing to realize Divine Mother. This is early in his life, but Mother still has not revealed herself to him. So he became despondent, and he saw a sword, and he took that sword and told Mother, if you don't show yourself, I will cut my throat. And it was at that moment that Divine Mother, that Kali, revealed herself to him, but in a very remarkable way. Not in the typical form that we are used to seeing Kali in, the black form with 4 arms and so on and so forth. Not like that. He said waves of consciousness engulfed him. Waves of consciousness, divine consciousness. And he lost external consciousness. And then when he came back to consciousness, he could only say, Mother, Mother. This is a very interesting realization. It's like the realization of the formless Divine Mother. And then after that, he said, I've had God realization, but I'm not satisfied. He used to say that he is like a glutton in the spiritual field. What's a glutton? Somebody who eats excessively. Even after you're full, you'll keep eating. That's what a glutton does. So in the same way, Sri Ramakrishna attained God realization, but he wasn't satisfied because he was a glutton in the spiritual field. So he told Divine Mother, now I want to realize you in different forms and aspects. Show me different forms and aspects of yourself. And then she took him through one path after another. So just to give you, so of course he also had the vision of Kali in the traditional form, as black with the 4 arms and so on and so forth. And he realized the truth of that. But he also practiced so many different paths. He practiced Vaishnavism. Bhairavi Brahmani was one of his first gurus, who was a Vaishnava Tantric. So he also practiced Vaishnava disciplines, Tantric disciplines, realized God in all these forms. He practiced Advaita Vedanta, the non-dual tradition of philosophy, under the itinerant naked monk named Totapuri. And Sri Ramakrishna would refer to him as Nengta, which means the naked one. Out of respect. You're not supposed to call your guru by his name, so he said the naked one. So Totapuri taught him Advaita Vedanta. Within a very short period of time, he attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And Totapuri was amazed. He was astonished because he said, what took me 40 years to attain, he achieved in a matter of days. And even more remarkably, so I was just explaining the different practices within Hinduism. So he practiced Vaishnavism, he practiced Tantrism, he practiced Advaita Vedanta. He realized God in so many different forms, as Shiva, as Kali, as Ganesha, as Krishna, Sita, Rama, Hanuman, and so on and so forth, Radha. But even outside of Hinduism, he practiced Christianity and had a vision of Jesus merging into his own body. He practiced Islam, and he realized Allah also. And he had a vision of what seemed to be Muhammad. So on the basis of all of these different spiritual practices and realizations, he taught the harmony of all religious paths. And what he found, so remember, Sri Ramakrishna lived from 1836 to 1886, so in the 19th century. And when he was speaking to different people, what he found is that most religious people, most spiritual people, they subscribed to what can be called an either-or logic. either/or logic. That means if you're a Vaishnava, you'll say God is Krishna. Krishna is the highest. Shaktas will say, no, God is Kali, Mother Kali or Divine Mother. And Krishna is lower. Advaita Vedantins will say, Brahman is Nirguna, impersonal, attributeless. Bhaktas will say, no, God is Saguna, personal, and with form. But it's either one or the other. You don't have both. This is the history of the world religions, and including even Hinduism. What you'll find is there's this either-or logic. If God is X, God cannot be Y. If God has form, God cannot be without form. If God is personal, God cannot be impersonal. And Sri Ramakrishna, what made him so unique and so great is that he rejected this either-or logic in favor of what I would call a both-and logic. It's both and, the opposite of either-or. Either-or, everybody knows. Both and. This is a new paradigm. This is a new spiritual paradigm for understanding the divine, understanding different religious and spiritual paths, different spiritual philosophies. He was the both and Avatara. Okay? So I'll give you an example. February 1882. Sri Ramakrishna asked M, the author of the Gospel, he said, well, do you believe in God with form or without form? M, rather surprised, said to himself, how can one believe in God without form when one believes in God with form? M is subscribing to this either-or logic. That's right. It's one or the other. How can you accept both? Then he says, M says, and if one believes in God without form, how can one believe that God has form? Can these two contradictory ideas be true at the same time? Can a white liquid like milk be black? So M is just thinking to himself these things. These are his thoughts. Then M says, sir, I like to think of God as formless. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, very good. It is enough to have faith in either aspect. You believe in God without form, that is quite all right. But never for a moment think that this alone is true and all else false. Remember that God with form is just as true as God without form. But hold fast to your own conviction. And then M writes, the assertion that both are equally true amazed M. He had never learned this from his books. M had a kind of a Western education in India because it was British colonial India at the time. And in Western logic, you don't find this idea. You find this either-or kind of logic. So he's completely befuddled by Sri Ramakrishna's statement. How can God be both with form and without form? M had studied Western philosophy, and he had studied, I think he was probably thinking of Aristotle's law of non-contradiction. This is a famous law that Aristotle taught, the law of non-contradiction. This is Aristotle is the great Greek philosopher, the ancient Greek philosopher. Aristotle defined this law of non-contradiction as follows. Aristotle said, it is impossible for the same thing to belong and not to belong at the same time to the same thing and in the same respect. This is a very technical definition. What is the law of non-contradiction according to Aristotle? It is impossible for the same thing to belong and not to belong at the same time to the same thing and in the same respect. Okay, this tablecloth can be white, and this microphone can be black, or at least the microphone stand, right? But this white table cannot be black at the same time. Either the table is white or the table is black. It cannot be both. That's the idea. Okay, now M, he knew this law of non-contradiction. He's used to this either-or kind of logic. So if God is without form, how can it at the same time be with form? It doesn't make any sense. This is his objection, okay? So now, Sri Ramakrishna taught M, and of course everybody else who came to him, a completely new spiritual paradigm. this both and paradigm. So I want to focus on 6 main topics, okay? 6 main questions. And we'll look at how Sri Ramakrishna answered these questions from the standpoint of this both and logic. So the first major question, is God personal or impersonal? The term for personal is saguna, and impersonal is nirguna. Okay? And this is important. A lot of Hindus get confused about these things. Let's introduce 4 Sanskrit terms, okay? And along 2 axes. Nirguna, saguna, along the, let's say, the vertical axis. Nirguna, saguna, impersonal, personal, attributeless with attributes. And the horizontal axis, nirakara, sakara. So there are 4 terms. Don't confuse these terms. Nirguna, saguna, nirakara, sakara. Nirakara means formless. Sakara means with form. You have to keep in mind these 4 different terms. This is very important, okay? Because now, just like you know the Cartesian coordinate system with the axes and all that, you can have different permutations. You can have saguna, sakara, which means the personal God, saguna, but sakara, with form. The personal God with form. What's an example? Kali, the black Kali with 4 arms. Ganesha, the elephant god. Hanuman, monkey. They have different forms. Mother Durga, standing on the lion and all that. Right? But you can also have saguna, nirakara. Saguna plus nirakara. Saguna means the personal God, but formless, without form. Nirakara, saguna. You might be wondering, how can that be? Of course it can be. Look, think about Islam. Islam teaches the formless but personal God. Think about the Brahmo Samaj. In Sri Ramakrishna's time, the Brahmo Samaj was extremely popular and influential. Keshab Chandra Sen was a Brahmo Samaj. So many of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples were originally Brahmo Samaj followers. Naren, Swami Vignana, Rakhal Maharaj, this Brahmanandaji, so many people would be attending Brahmo Samaj lectures. The theology of Brahmo Samaj is Nirakara Saguna, formless but personal God. Sikhism, anyone know anything about the Sikh religion, S-I-K-H? It's also formless but personal. They don't believe in God with form, but they're bhaktas. They practice bhakti toward the formless personal God. Okay, so now we have saguna sakara and saguna nirakara. Now, there's also nirguna nirakara. Nirguna nirakara means the impersonal Brahman, which is formless. It has to be formless. When Sri Ramakrishna attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi, when he was practicing Advaita Vedanta under Totapuri, he described the realization as using an analogy. He said, imagine a salt doll, Nuner Putul, and it goes to measure the depth of the ocean. The moment the salt doll sets foot in the ocean, what happens? It dissolves into the ocean, which means what? There's no subject-object duality. There's just oneness, non-duality, non-dual, pure consciousness. So no form, right? No form. Formless and impersonal. Nirakara, nirguna. Now you might ask, so now we've covered 3 permutations. You might ask, well, there's one remaining combination, one remaining permutation. What is that? Nirguna, sakara. Is that possible? Nirguna, sakara. This is very interesting. Is it possible for God or for the divine, for the ultimate reality, to be impersonal but have a form? From the ultimate standpoint, I think the answer is no. Okay? But for sadhakas, even in the tradition of Advaita Vedanta, what you'll find, like if you study texts like Panchadashi, you'll find that certain Advaitic meditations are recommended, like meditating on light, formless light. You can say formless light to represent Brahman, but it has a form in a certain sense. Light is still a form. It's not a form with 4 arms or 6 arms, but there's still a form. So in that sense, you can say that for sadhakas, Advaita sadhakas, spiritual aspirants following the path of knowledge, they can meditate on the formless, impersonal Brahman. In the form of light, Sri Ramakrishna would say, imagine yourself as a fish, joyfully swimming in the ocean of Satchit Ananda. Another example of a formless, impersonal meditation. Think of the infinite sky, meditate on that infinite sky as the impersonal Brahman. All of these are forms, they're still forms. Sky is a form, light is a form, the ocean of Satchitananda is a form. But these are forms corresponding to the impersonal absolute, non-dual Brahman. But from the ultimate standpoint, Advaita Vedanta says, none of these forms are real. It's a stepping stone. Or it's like a ladder. If you're climbing to the roof, you can use a ladder. These forms, these impersonal forms like the sky, the ocean, they're like that ladder. But once you reach the roof, you can kick the ladder away. You have to transcend all forms. That's why during Sri Ramakrishna's Advaitic Sadhana, when Totapuri was teaching him, Sri Ramakrishna, he was so pure, his mind immediately went to a higher plane, but he was having vision of Mother Kali, the form of Mother Kali, the blissful form of Mother Kali, with the forearms black. So he couldn't reach this samadhi state, nirvikalpa samadhi. So what did Totapuri do? He took a shard of glass, pierced his, just between the eyebrows slightly. And Sri Ramakrishna saw that his beloved Mother Kali, the form of Mother Kali, was, whoa, sorry, very dramatic, too dramatic, was cut in half by the sword of knowledge, Jnanasi. The form of Mother Kali was cut in half with the sword of knowledge. And then his mind soared into the Nirvikalpa plane. He attained this non-dual knowledge of Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Okay? So, now we have in mind these four coordinates. Nirguna, Saguna, Nirakara, Sakara. Keep in mind this paradigm, okay, as we discuss these things. So now, is God personal or impersonal? Saguna or Nirguna? Now, if you look at the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they believe in God as Saguna, and Saguna only, at least in the Orthodox forms. Okay, Orthodox Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, believe in Saguna Brahman, in the personal God. Why do I say Orthodox? Some of you may know that there are some great Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart. There are great Sufi mystics. Some of them seem to have realized the impersonal Brahman as well. Meister Eckhart is a good example, this Catholic German mystic. He was Christian, he was Catholic, but he seemed to he distinguished between, these are two terms in German, Gott and Gottheit. So Gott, G-O-T-T in German means God, and Gottheit, G-O-T-T-H-E-I-T, means Godhead. And he distinguished Godhead from God, and the way he described Godhead seems to be like Shankara's Nirguna Brahman. And he said it's beyond even this God, which seems to be more like the personal God. So in some of the great mystical traditions within Christianity, within Islam, Judaism, you have this tradition of Kabbalah, mystical tradition of Kabbalah. And there you may also find this impersonal idea of the divine. But in the Orthodox forms, the official doctrine of Christianity, you find the personal God. They don't accept the impersonal God. So you see the either-or logic. Either God is personal or impersonal. They say God is personal, therefore God cannot be impersonal. This is what the Orthodox Abrahamic religions say. Now you might ask, well, what about Hinduism? What do the different Hindu traditions say? See, the thing about Hinduism is it's a vast religious tradition, which includes so many different sub-traditions, schools of thought within it, okay? So let's look at Vedanta. Let's focus on Vedanta. And let's go through some of the main schools, traditional schools of Vedanta. Let's start with Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. What does Shankara say? He says that Brahman is only nirguna. Brahman is only impersonal, attributeless, non-dual, pure consciousness. Okay? So you might ask, well, but Shankara composed these beautiful devotional hymns, bhakti and all that. The thing is, if you want to, I was taught this when I was in training center, Jushtanandaji Maharaj, he was our principal and he taught us classes. He translated Shankaracharya's commentaries on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Sutra from Sanskrit into Bangla, into Bengali. He was a scholar of Shankara. And he taught us, he said, if you want to understand Shankara's teachings, Shankara's philosophy, you have to base your ideas, your understanding on his Prasthana Traya Bhashyas. His commentary, especially on the Brahma Sutra, that's the most authoritative text of Shankara's. And then his commentary on the Gita, Bhagavad Gita, and his commentary on the Upanishads. These contain his Siddhanta, his true position. Now, whether he composed these other hymns, Lord knows. He might have been a great bhakta, who knows. But what we know is that he composed these commentaries on the scriptures. So we have to infer his views based on these commentaries, which we know are Shankara's. Okay? And there, in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya, he asks, what about Ishvara, the personal God? He says, Ishvara, the personal God, Saguna Brahman, is the same Nirguna Brahman with upadhis. The term upadhi means limiting adjunct. So in Shankara's philosophy, the only reality is Nirguna Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness. Brahma Satyam. And Jagat Mithya. Jagat Mithya means this whole world of names and forms is an illusion. Even the personal God is an illusion. Even these individual souls, different jivas, illusion. There are no individual souls, there is no personal God, and there are no names and forms. There's just non-dual, pure consciousness. And that non-dual, pure consciousness, when we superimpose Ishvaratva, when we superimpose the upadhi of the personal God onto that non-dual Brahman, then we have the personal God. This table is the same non-dual Brahman with the upadhi of tableness. I am the same non-dual Brahman with the upadhi of Medhanandatva, and so on. The microphone, same non-dual pure consciousness with the upadhi, the superimposition of microphoneness. And what does Shankara say about these upadhis? Upadhis are not real. They're also an illusion. The superimposition itself is an illusion, which means the only reality is non-dual Brahman. So I explain this because I think there's a lot of confusion about what Shankara taught, mainly because people talk a lot about Shankara, but they don't read Shankara. This is a big problem with Shankara. He's so popular and so prestigious. Everybody talks about Shankara and very confidently, Shankara taught X, Y, and Z. Almost nobody reads his commentaries. Read his commentaries on the Brahma Sutra especially. How many in the room have read it? Almost nobody, I can guarantee you. Okay, very few. So maybe one in the room. Good. So read his commentary on the Brahma Sutra and you'll understand Shankara's philosophy. Now, that's Advaita Vedanta. What about some of the traditional bhakti schools of Vedanta? For instance, Ramanuja's Vishishtadvaita Vedanta. What does Ramanuja say? He was also a great realized soul. What does he say about God? He says God is only personal. Exactly the opposite of Shankaracharya. Ramanuja says God is Vishnu, the personal God, Saguna, and Sakara, with form. He has an exact form. He describes it very beautifully. Vishnu is holding a mace and a discus, and he's lying in Vishnu Loka on this bed, Shesha, this serpent bed, and so on and so forth. God with form. Personal God with form. What does Madhva say? The Dvaita Vedantan. He also says the same thing as Ramanuja. God is only personal and not impersonal. The impersonal Brahman does not exist, according to Ramanuja's school and according to Madhva's school. So you might ask, but when Ramanuja is faced with statements about the impersonal Brahman, there seem to be some statements in the Upanishads, in the Bhagavad Gita. How does he interpret them? Ramanuja says, yes, Nirguna, I accept Nirguna Brahman, but you have to define it differently. That's not the impersonal Brahman. It's the same Vishnu, but Nirguna in the sense of being devoid of any inauspicious attributes. Devoid, heya guna vivarjitam. That's the way that Ramanuja explains it. Vishnu is Nirguna, not in Shankara's sense, but in the sense of being free from any bad qualities. What are bad qualities? Being immoral, being selfish, having limited knowledge. What Ramanuja says is, when the scriptures talk about Brahman as nirguna, it doesn't mean that it's impersonal in Shankara's sense. It means that God is perfect and free from all imperfections, free from all bad qualities. But he does not accept nirguna Brahman in Shankara's sense. This is important to understand. Understand this subtle point. Ramanuja and Madhva reject the existence of nirguna Brahman. They don't accept nirvikalpa samadhi. They don't believe in nirguna Brahman. God is only personal. God is not impersonal. God cannot be impersonal. So you see that there are these contradictory schools in traditional Vedanta. Shankara's Advaita Vedanta says Brahman is only nirguna, impersonal. Ramanuja and Madhva say God is only personal, Vishnu. Now, there's a complexity because there are some later traditions of Vedanta that emerged, Vaishnava schools of Vedanta, and I want to mention two of them in particular. Chaitanya's school of Achintya Bheda Bheda Vedanta, otherwise known as Gaudiya Vaishnavism. ISKCON is based on this tradition. Okay, Hare Krishna, Prabhupada. And another Vaishnava tradition of Vedanta called Shuddha-Advaita Vedanta. Shuddha-Advaita is the school of Vallabhacharya. What were their views on the nature of God? What they said is, Chaitanya and Chaitanya's followers, Vallabha and Vallabha's followers, what they say is, God is both personal and impersonal. So now you start to see this both and logic coming into the tradition of Vedanta. Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva subscribe to an either-or logic, okay? But a little bit later, a few centuries later, these two Vaishnava schools of Vedanta, Achintya Bheda Bheda Vedanta of Chaitanya and Shuddha-Advaita Vedanta of Vallabha, they started to defend a both and logic, like Sri Ramakrishna's, but not the same. And I'll explain in a second why it's not the same. Why Sri Ramakrishna goes even further than these Vaishnava schools. Okay, but let me explain these views first. What do these two schools say about the nature of God? What they say is, the supreme reality is our beloved Krishna. Krishna. But the impersonal Brahman also exists. So how does this impersonal Brahman relate to our supreme Krishna? This impersonal Brahman is the peripheral brilliance. It is just a minor aspect of our beloved Krishna. This is what these two Vaishnava schools say. Achintya Bheda Bheda Vedanta, ISKCON, and Vallabha school of Shuddha-Advaita Vedanta. So they accept the impersonal and they accept the personal. They accept God with form, they accept God without form. And the Sanskrit term they use is that Brahman is the Tanubha, T-A-N-U-B-H-A, or Pratibha, P-R-A-T-I-B-H-A. Just a minor effulgence. Impersonal Brahman is just a minor effulgence or aspect of the personal God, Krishna. And they say, you Gyanis making such a big deal out of Nirguna Brahman, fine, you can have your Brahman. You can even get mukti if you want. But the bliss of that mukti is nothing in comparison to the bliss of realizing our beloved Krishna. Realizing God as Krishna is infinitely greater than the boring realization of non-dual Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Now you can see there's still a hierarchy. There's still higher and lower. Krishna is the highest and the greatest. Your impersonal Brahman, you followers of Shankara, that's just a minor aspect of our Krishna, and it's not as fun, and it's not as blissful a realization as the realization of Krishna. So now, I've given you a very brief bird's eye view of the history of some of the main traditions of Vedanta. Ramanuja, Madhva say God is only personal, Vishnu, and not impersonal. Shankara says Brahman is only impersonal, not personal. Vallabha's Shuddha-Advaita and Chaitanya's Achintya Bheda Bheda Vedanta say it's the both and Avatara. Sri Ramakrishna will turn to Shankaracharya and say, you are absolutely right, Shankara, that Brahman is Nirguna. I realized it. Sri Ramakrishna realized Nirguna Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. He knows it's true. But he'll say, Shankara, don't limit Brahman to just Nirguna Brahman. God is also Saguna. Then Sri Ramakrishna will turn to Ramanuja and Madhva and say, I love your Vishnu. I've realized God is Vishnu through bhakti yoga. I know it's true. You're right. But you're wrong in limiting God to just Vishnu. God is also impersonal. There's also impersonal Brahman which you have to accept. Okay? Then, when Sri Ramakrishna turns to these other Vaishnava schools of Vedanta, Achinta Bheda Veda Vedanta and Shuddha Dvaita Vedanta, Sri Ramakrishna will say, wonderful, you accept both Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman, impersonal Brahman and the personal God. Great. But why are you still going into this higher and lower talk? Why do you still have hierarchies? There shouldn't be any hierarchies between the personal and the impersonal. One is not higher or greater or more real than the other. This is Sri Ramakrishna's advance from even the schools of Achinta Bheda Vedanta and Shuddha Dvaita Vedanta. He accepts not only the equal reality of Nirguna and Saguna Brahman, but also the equal value of both the personal and the impersonal. The equal value. The equal reality and the equal value of both Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. Okay? Are you following? This is heavy philosophy, but it's very important to understand what makes Sri Ramakrishna so great and so unique in the history of world spirituality and even in the history of the divine incarnations. If there's any precedent, it would be Bhagavan Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, because you find that Krishna is again and again, he's emphasizing this both and logic. Brahman is Nirguna, Brahman is also Saguna. Brahman is Sakara, Brahman is also Nirakara. Sri Krishna says Jnana Yoga can lead you to the highest, Bhakti Yoga can also lead you to the highest, Karma Yoga can also lead you to the highest, Dhyana Yoga, discussed in chapter 6 of the Gita, can also take you to the highest. That's why Swami Vivekananda said, we have a rule book dictated by Swami Vivekananda, originally in Bengali, which is a private document, it's not published. But there's one section of it which is published in the complete works, but not labeled as such. Swamiji himself says, God himself came in the form of Bhagavan Sri Krishna to start to harmonize the different conflicting religious philosophies, spiritual traditions, the different yogas, but he didn't complete the task. Then in the 19th century, that same God, that same Lord, incarnated again as Sri Ramakrishna to complete the job. Because one thing you'll find is Bhagavad Gita is grounded in Hinduism. It's harmonizing the different traditions within Hinduism. But in the course of time, the problem became even greater because now the different world religions are conflicting with each other. And there's a lot of religious bigotry and fanaticism and violence among the different world's religious practitioners and the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews and the Hindus and so on and so forth. So then God had to come again in the form of Sri Ramakrishna to harmonize all of the world's spiritual paths and religious traditions, which even Krishna did not do. This is what Swamiji says in this rule book. Okay. Now, you might say this is a nice idea, but how do you prove it? How do you prove it? Sri Ramakrishna, as I said, was a great spiritual scientist, and he proved it. He experientially verified the truth of this both and logic, of the equal reality and the equal value of Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman, on the basis of a very special kind of spiritual experience which he called Vignana. Vignana. He says there are two fundamental stages in spiritual realization. One is called Jnana, the next is called Vignana. He says when you're trying to reach the roof of a house, you have to climb up the staircase. When you climb up the staircase, you say, Neti, Neti, not this, Brahman is not my body, Brahman is not my mind, Brahman is not these names and forms, until you reach the roof. The roof signifies Brahma Jnana. Jnana. Reaching the roof means you have realized your true essence as non-dual pure consciousness in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And he says ordinary jivas, jiva kotis, they leave their body in this state within 21 days. If you stay in the state of samadhi, you will leave the body. Then he says there's a special category of soul which he calls Ishvara kotis. Ishvara kotis are either avataras, incarnations, or avatared angsho. In Bengali, he says, they are either avataras or those who are born as parts of an incarnation. Look at Rakhal Maharaj, Brahmanandaji. They are Ishvara kotis. They are not avataras, but he is an amsha. He is a portion of Sri Ramakrishna Avatara. He's a great vibhuti of the Sri Ramakrishna Avatara. Okay? Now, the Vignani, Sri Ramakrishna says, Ishvara kotis, after reaching the roof, they've already attained jnana, they can go on to attain the state of Vignana. And he says the Vignani will look back on that staircase that it left behind and say, wait a minute, the stairs are made of the same materials as the roof. The roof is made of bricks, lime, brick dust. Now what are the stairs made of? Bricks, lime, and brick dust. The very thing that the Jnani rejected as unreal, Jagat Mithya, all these names and forms, the Vignani says, wait a minute, they're also God. Every name and form is a real, blissful manifestation of Divine Mother. So he says, the Vignani realizes that the divine reality is both nirguna and saguna, both personal and impersonal. Both nirakara and sakara, both without form and with form. And this whole world of names and forms is mojar kuti. Instead of being a dhoka tati in Bengali, Sri Ramakrishna would say, Jnanis look upon this world as an illusion, as a dream. Vigyanis see this whole world as mojar kuti, as a mansion of mirth, as a mart of joy. Why? Because everything is God. God is playing in the form of this video camera, even the video camera, even these monkeys which are running around. Everything is God, different playful manifestations of the same Divine Mother. This is the Vignani's realization. So it is on the basis of Sri Ramakrishna's own realization of Vignana that he taught the harmony of all the world's religious and spiritual paths. And he gave some beautiful metaphors, parables, analogies to explain this harmony. My favorite is the chameleon. Many of you know about this chameleon. One guy comes to a tree and sees a lizard on the tree, and it's green. And the person comes back and tells his friends, hey, there's a green lizard on a tree. Go and check it out. A few minutes later, friend number 2 goes to the tree, and he sees a lizard, but he sees a red lizard. He gets angry. He comes back and says, why are you lying to me? You said it was green. It's red. A third friend number 3 goes, and he sees a yellow lizard. And now they're all fighting with each other, and they come to the tree. The lizard is there. And there's one unusual person who lives under this tree. This person says, stop your fighting. I live here, I know, I see this chameleon 24 hours a day. He is a chameleon. This is a special kind of lizard that changes colors. So all of you are right. This chameleon is red, it's also yellow, it's also green, it's also blue. Sometimes it has no color at all. It is a chameleon. So likewise, God has many different forms and aspects. Each of these different colors, green, red, yellow, they correspond to different forms of the personal God, Saguna Brahman. Now, here's the question. What does the colorless chameleon correspond to? Colorless chameleon corresponds to Nirguna Brahman, the impersonal Brahman, right? It could also be the formless, but either the formless personal or the formless impersonal, either. And this person sitting under the tree is the Vignani, the one who has realized the same divine reality in multiple forms and aspects. What's another example that Sri Ramakrishna used to use? The blind men and the elephant. There are 5 blind men. Each of them is touching a different part of the same elephant. And the person touching the trunk says, I know what this elephant is like. It's dry, it's scaly, it's hard to the touch. There's another blind man touching the tail. You're wrong. This elephant is furry, it's soft, and so on. All these 5 blind men are quarreling with each other. And there's one person who can see the whole elephant. And he says, stop your bickering. I can see the whole elephant, you're all right. But don't limit the elephant to what you're experiencing. Don't limit the elephant to only that part or that aspect of the elephant that you happen to be experiencing, touching. Because it's all of these things. And again, the person who can see the whole elephant, Vignani. He has realized God in multiple forms and aspects. So it's on the basis of this very special, expansive spiritual state of Vignana that Sri Ramakrishna was able to beautifully harmonize all of the different conflicting Vedantic traditions and all of the different conflicting religious traditions throughout the world. This is an unprecedented achievement, actually. We have to appreciate the greatness. Many of us are initiated, and we're given the Ramakrishna mantra. We worship Sri Ramakrishna. But we have very little understanding of what makes him so. Sri Ramakrishna himself. Now, why is this important? See, we need a philosophical framework to support our spiritual practice. We need a philosophical framework to ground, to serve as the basis of our sadhana, our spiritual practice. Okay? We'll talk about this a little bit more when we discuss the gospel a little bit later in the same retreat. Buddhism, their main path is what's called the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path. And the first factor in this Noble Eightfold Path is samyak drishti. You have to have a right understanding. You have to have a right view of this world, the right view of reality. On that basis, you can go on to practice the different sadhanas in Buddhism. In the same way, we have to have samyak drishti in our tradition. Who was Sri Ramakrishna? Isn't this an important question for all worshippers of Sri Ramakrishna? Every devotee of Sri Ramakrishna has to give a good answer to this question. Who is Sri Ramakrishna? I would suggest that the best answer is he was the both and Avatara. He was Nirguna Brahman. He was equally Saguna Brahman. He was the formless personal God. He is also the God with form. Sarva Deva Devi Swarupa. He is the essence of all Devas and Devis. He is also the Nirguna Brahman. And if you understand Sri Ramakrishna in that way, your whole spiritual life becomes so much richer. And then you don't feel these conflicts anymore between bhakti and jnana and karma. Now, why are there conflicts? If you ask, why do people experience these conflicts? Because if you follow a different philosophical framework, there are conflicts. This is a fact. People don't like talking about these things, and they say, why do you emphasize these differences? Because we should have clarity of mindset. We should have a clarity of understanding. Now let's go back to the same traditional schools of Vedanta. Each one of them has a hierarchy of the yogas. Each one of them. Let's start with Shankara's school of Advaita Vedanta. What is the highest yoga according to Shankara? Anyone? The path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga. In what sense is it higher? Shankaracharya clearly says there are two categories of spiritual aspirants. There are Manda Adhikaris, inferior spiritual aspirants, and there are Uttama Adhikaris, superior spiritual aspirants. For the Manda Adhikaris, the inferior aspirants, there's Karma Yoga, there's Bhakti Yoga, devotion, selfless service, all those things. Why is it for inferior spiritual aspirants? They have impure minds. And through bhakti, through devotional practices, through Karma Yoga, we purify our minds. Once we purify our minds, we can graduate from our bachelor's level to master's and PhD. Then we become an Uttama Adhikari. We have very pure minds. Now, what should the Uttama Adhikari do, the superior spiritual aspirant? Shankaracharya clearly says, stop bhakti, stop karma yoga. Why should we stop those things? Because they will only reinforce your sense of duality. As long as I believe in a personal God who is different from me, I'm going to be reinforcing subject-object duality. How will I realize non-duality through that path? So Shankaracharya says, once you have a very pure mind and you become an Uttama Adhikari, you have to stop your Karma Yoga, stop your Bhakti Yoga, and you have to practice the path of knowledge alone, Jnana Yoga. Shankaracharya never in his commentary says you should practice Bhakti at the same time as Jnana. Never. You just give me a counter, just look at the commentaries yourself and show me where he says that you should practice Bhakti and Jnana at the same time. Never. He believes in Krama Samanvaya. Krama Samanvaya means you can harmonize Bhakti and Jnana, but in a sense of stages. As long as you are an inferior spiritual aspirant, you practice Bhakti and Karma Yoga. Once you become a superior spiritual aspirant, you have to practice the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, alone, and you don't practice Bhakti and Karma Yoga. Either you are an inferior aspirant or a superior spiritual aspirant. You cannot be both at the same time. That's Shankara's view. So now in his hierarchy, the path of knowledge is greater than bhakti and karma yoga. Now let's look at Ramanuja and Madhva. And actually all of the bhakti schools, including Vallabha's school and Chaitanya's school, what's the best path and the highest path? Bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion. Right? Ramanuja, interestingly, he turns the tables on Shankara. And he says, Jnana Yoga is for inferior spiritual aspirants who are not ready to practice bhakti. It's very interesting. And the logic is also very interesting. Bhajananandaji, Revered Swami Medhanandaji, he's one of our great swamis. He's a very senior swami, vice president of our order. He would say, because he's an acharya in our training center, he was my acharya also, I'm sure he was also Maharaj's acharya in training center. What he would say is, Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita philosophy is far more practical for monks, even the monks and brahmacharis of the Ramakrishna order, than Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta. And one of the main reasons is the following. I'll explain why. Because Ramanuja says, look, in spiritual life, the first priority is purifying the mind. So through karma yoga, through bhakti practices like coming to these discourses, like worshipping Sri Ramakrishna, doing puja, prayer, all these things. All of those things are necessary to purify the mind. But ultimately, we also need to combine it with Jnana Yoga. Ramanuja is explaining Jnana Yoga, but he explains Jnana Yoga differently from Shankaracharya. According to Ramanuja, Jnana Yoga is meditation on your true nature as a jivatma, as an eternal individual soul separate from the body-mind complex. Ramanuja says the path of knowledge is meditating on your true spiritual nature as a divine soul separate from the body-mind complex. You have one jivatma, I have a different jivatma, you have a different jivatma. Through the combined practices of bhakti yoga, karma yoga, and jnana yoga, you will ultimately achieve atma avalokanam. You will realize yourself as a jivatma, as an eternal soul, separate from this body-mind complex. And only then, according to Ramanuja, only then are you qualified to practice the highest kind of bhakti yoga. What is the highest bhakti yoga, according to Ramanuja? He says, constantly thinking about God. That's what bhakti yoga is. It sounds very simple. How can that be so high? Try it. Try to think of God for 1 minute. All of you will fail. I guarantee you. Within a few seconds, you'll be thinking about what's for lunch, or how's my child doing, or why did that person say that? Nobody can think of God even for 1 minute continuously. Like an unbroken flow of oil poured from one vessel to another. Can you think of God in that way? Nobody. What Ramanuja says is, so long as you mistakenly identify with this body-mind complex, you cannot think of God constantly. You cannot practice the highest bhakti yoga. So first, through these lower bhakti yoga practices, whatever they are, prayer and japa and meditation and arati and all these things and discourses, and through karma yoga, selfless service, purify your mind, ultimately realize yourself as the jivatma separate from the body-mind complex. This is an extraordinary realization. Sri Ramakrishna talks about it. You know where? In the gospel, he explains the 6 chakras. And he says, worldly people, their consciousness is focused at the 3 lower chakras. The organ of generation, evacuation, and the navel. Then he says, through spiritual practice and by God's grace, ultimately you can come to the heart chakra. In the heart chakra, he says, the sadhaka, the spiritual aspirant, realizes that he is a jivatman, separate from the body-mind complex. He realizes the jivatman shikane, in the shape of a flame. And the sadhaka is amazed. He is astonished. He says, Eki, Eki, what is this? What is this? And he has a vision of light. This is what Ramanuja calls the culmination of the practice of Jnana Yoga. You realize yourself as a jivatman, separate from the body-mind complex. And see, notice, Sri Ramakrishna says, it's only when you reach the higher chakras that you can realize God, the personal God. First, you have to realize yourself as a jivatman. Revered Bhajanandaji, he used to say, our priority, when we study Advaita, Shankara's Advaita, all of us, nobody wants to be the Manda Adhikari. Everybody wants to be Uttama Adhikari. So everybody thinks, I'm already qualified, so I can study Shankara, I'm a non-dualist, I am Brahman, Aham Brahmasmi. You will not make any progress. And in fact, Sri Ramakrishna would say, so long as you have body consciousness and you try to practice Advaita Vedanta, tumi nijeke thokabe ar onnotke thokabe. In Bangla, you will deceive yourself and you will deceive others. Shankaracharya said that Advaita is an extremely high sublime spiritual philosophy meant for a tiny spiritual elite. People who have perfect mastery in sadhana chatushtaya, the fourfold sadhana, intense vairagya, detachment, intense perfect viveka, discrimination between the real and the unreal, perfectly selfless, perfectly egoless, intense longing for realization. How many people have this, have these qualifications? Everybody talks about Advaita. Almost nobody is fit to practice Advaita Vedanta. So Bhajanji said, forget about this Advaita for now. That's far distant. Ramanuja's philosophy is far more practical. First, realize yourself as a jivatman, as an eternal individual soul, separate from the body-mind complex. Then you can really feel bhakti for God. You can really feel devotion for God. So long as we haven't had that realization of ourselves as a soul separate from the body-mind complex, we cannot feel true love for Sri Ramakrishna. Impossible. So it's a much more practical philosophy, according to Bhajananji, and we can learn from it, in fact. In general, we study Shankara, we read Shankara, we listen to talks on Shankara, but it's not nearly as practical for most people as bhakti paths. Okay? So keep it in mind. Now, what did Sri Ramakrishna say about the state of liberation? What does the state of mukti look like? It's a very interesting question. Different religions have different views of the afterlife. If you attain the highest goal according to that religion, what happens to the soul after you leave the physical body? That's the question. So bhakti traditions, devotional schools, even Christianity, Islam, Judaism, they believe in an eternal heaven. Okay? An eternal heaven. The bhakti schools of Vedanta in Hinduism also believe in eternal heavens, lokas. They call them lokas. There's Vishnu Loka. The Vaishnavas believe in Goloka, also called Vrindavana. There's an eternal Vrindavana where bhaktas of Krishna's dwell in loving communion with the personal God. So there's different lokas, right? Shankara says these are all lower goals. This cannot be the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal cannot be dwelling in any kind of eternal heaven. At best, there is what he calls a Brahmaloka. That's a heaven, but it's not eternal. You go for some time. Ultimately, you have to merge in the non-dual Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna used to use this metaphor. He borrowed the metaphor from Ram Prasad, the great singer. Eating sugar and becoming sugar. Shankaracharya taught that the highest ideal is becoming sugar. Like the salt doll, melting in the ocean, merging in non-dual Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness. Bhaktas, he said, bhaktas don't want to become sugar, they want to eat sugar. How do you eat sugar? By living in this eternal heaven with the personal God, lovingly worshiping and serving the personal God. You know, one time, a householder devotee asked Holy Mother, Sharada Devi, Mother, I don't care for this nirvana, this idea of salt doll melting in the ocean, because what will happen to Sri Ramakrishna then? I love Sri Ramakrishna. I don't want to leave Sri Ramakrishna. She smiled and she said, you have nothing to worry about. Sri Ramakrishna has created Ramakrishna Loka for you. He has created a special Ramakrishna heaven for his bhaktas. And this is not a temporary heaven. This is an eternal heaven. We can eternally eat sugar to our heart's content. We won't get cavities. This is a healthy sugar. This is the amazing thing. And instead of having a hierarchy saying that either becoming sugar is eating sugar, like Shankaracharya school says, or eating sugar is superior to becoming sugar, like the Vaishnava schools say, he puts eating sugar and becoming sugar on an equal footing. It's a matter of preference. It's a matter of temperament. There's no higher and lower. That's the beauty of Sri Ramakrishna as the both and Avatara. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Paramastu.